par. Perfect. So this is going to be a tutorial on how to do the sit to stand exercise, and really a quick overview of why you may want to do pose to pose over straight ahead animation. So really quickly, I already have my chair in the scene. I did an earlier tutorial on how to clean up and make a simple rig for your objects for animation. So if you need assistance with that, go ahead and watch that video. Right now, I'm going to create reference, my ultimate bony rig, and I'm going to go ahead and enter that. For those who are unaware of how to reference, really quick, all you have to do is go to File, scroll down to Create Reference, and once you click on Create Reference, all you have to do is select the file that you want to reference, and it'll open up just like so. So now, as you can see, this chair is way too big for this character. So I have two options when I am animating in a scene. Option number one, depending on how well your rig is, I can select the rig and I can increase the size of the character. And if this doesn't manipulate or change the controllers, that's good. Okay, great. That means that I can manipulate this with comfort. So I can do that. And then this is the one time where I'll say it's okay to rotate your main controller. This looks about good. I'm going to go into the rotate y-axis in the channel box here in the corner. I'm just press 90, so it's perfectly a 90-degree angle. And this is a completely valid way for animating your scene. Another option is you can start your character off like this, and then you can manipulate your objects around your character. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize this chair, and I'm going to rotate like so. Again, to make it easier on myself, I'm just going to go into the channel box, -90 degrees, so it's perfectly 90. I'm going to go into my left view, so I can move this chair right behind the character. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate this character to where I want them to be sitting. So I'm going to select the W key, and I'm just going to move this main controller where I would want them to be sitting. So this looks like a comfortable spot here. Now that I have that sitting spot, I'm going to select my chair again, and I'm going to resize it to my character, like so. And I want to shrink it down a little bit more. I want to make sure that my character looks like they're able to sit comfortably in this chair. So I'm going to manipulate the character a little bit more, and this feels rather comfortable to me. So I'm going to keep that there. Now, I don't want these hands here because I'm going to be animating from this view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to perspective view. And as you can see, the chair is obviously not under the character. So I'm going to move that chair right underneath. I can also do this by going to the front view and moving the chair where I would like it to be. You know, because I'm an animator, I don't want too much symmetry. So I'm just going to move it slightly over to the side. And that way it's nice and asymmetrical. Now, these arms, I do not need these arms. Now, there's two options. You can go to the outliner. You can go inside of the ultimate bony rig, and you can scroll down until you find the object that you do not want. This being the left arm, so I'm going to press the H key. And oh, look at this. Okay, it is locked. It cannot be modified. So, luckily, we have an alternative for the ultimate rig, and that is in the layers, there is already a selected option for you to hide your limbs. And that is the bony arms layer. So I'm going to click the V button for visualize, and boom, it's gone. So luckily we have that alternative. Otherwise, I would have to do some Maya finessing. But luckily, this is why I enjoy using the Ultimate Bony Rig. Luckily, there's already a way to turn it on and off. So now that the arms are gone, I'm going to go back to the left view. And just like I had demonstrated in a previous video, again, I'm going to show you how to put all of your key controllers, all your controllers into one layer so that it's easier to be able to key everything that needs to be keyed in your keyframes. So I'm going to demonstrate that really quick. Let me quickly call this Geo. Sorry, this is Geo for my chair. So when I click on this layer, if I click the R, I don't want to be able to select my geometry, so I put it in a brand new layer here. And again, there's a video describing how to do that as well. So now that my geometry is in a layer, I'm going to create a brand new layer for my controllers. So I'm going to go into my layers box, create a new layer and assign from selected objects, the selected object being the head controller that has been clicked. I'm going to go ahead and click that. Now that I have this new layer, I'm going to rename this layer controllers in the name box, and I'm going to click on save. So now that it has been put into this new layer, I'm going to select the V button to make sure that every single thing that turns invisible should be in my controller layer. So if I were to select this object and go to the layer, I'm going to right click, I'm going to scroll down to add selected objects, select add selected objects, and now because it's disappeared, I know for a fact that the controller is no longer visible because it's in my layer. So just like in my earlier tutorial, because the G key is able to select the last action made, if I select the G key, it should automatically add my controller to the controller layer. And let's find out what happens. Boom, perfect. So G works. So I'm going to go down the line. I'm going to select all of my controllers that I want to be keyed. Select this one, select this one. I also want to select the foot controllers. I'm going to go into perspective view so it's easier to see the controllers that I want to select. I'm going to select the rest of the feet. So see, I select the G key, but nothing's happening, and it's because I performed a different action. So all you have to do is perform the action that you want, select the key, go to the layer controller, and you're going to scroll down to add selected objects, select add selected objects, and now because that was my last action, if I press the G key again on this controller, it's gone, it's vanished, perfect. So I've got those, and my last ones are my knee controllers, perfect, and those are all the keys that I want to be animated. I do not want to animate the main controller, and I do not want to animate these back arrows for the sake of this exercise. There may come a time where you do want to animate and key your IK and FK switches, and this is really, really helpful, especially if you're doing a jump exercise, which happens to be the next project, and we'll cover that then. So now that I have all the keys that I possibly want selected and keyed for my keyframes, I can select the V button again so that I can see the keys so that I'm able to animate. You do not want to reference your controllers because then you can't animate. Okay, so let's unreference the controllers. And now I'm going to go back to the left view. And the first thing I'm going to do is move my character a little bit. So for this, I'm going to go into the perspective view, and I just want to manipulate and change my character so it's not in such a basic pose. So let's go ahead, and I'm only using the perspective view so that I can manipulate the feet. Otherwise, if I go to the left view, it's very, very difficult to select the different controllers. So I'm going to the perspective view. I also want to move these knees a little bit. I'm going to move this knee out. I'm going to move this knee a little bit as well. Also to keep in mind, if you find this to be jarring, this happens especially when you're referencing the Ultimate Rig, all you have to do, if you have this color differentiation, is go to Lighting, in the top corner right here, go to Lighting, and you're going to select Two-Sided Lighting. And after you select Two-Sided Lighting, then you have a consistent color. So hopefully that helps. If it's too jarring, if you want to keep it, by all means, it'll be actually more helpful for this exercise because it'll be darker in the background, like so. So let's go to Two-Sided Lighting. And now that I have my feet separated, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my hips back, and let's see if I can just move it a little further back this way. So now my character is resting on this chair. And this is my first frame that I'm going to key. And you know what? I'm actually going to push this back even more so that I can manipulate the back a little bit so it really looks like the character is leaning in this chair. Okay, so that's an okay way to start. Again, like I would probably manipulate this even further, but for the sake of moving, this is a good place to start. So now what I could do is go down the line and select each and every key that I want to be keyframed. Anything that can and will move, I want to make sure that's keyed. Or, because I already did the work ahead of time, I can go to my layer controller and select all the objects and then key everything at once. So now I know that all of these are keyed at one frame or another, being the first frame. So now that that is keyed, the next thing I want to do, and this is going to be your first kind of introduction into pose to pose versus straight ahead. So if I were to animate this straight ahead, what I would do is I would go to this next frame and you would go down frame by frame by frame and slowly start manipulating the timing. So I only want this character to move a little bit. And then I would just go down the line and continue to animate this character frame by frame by frame. The reason why this can be difficult is because, look, I'm not keying everything at once. So if I were to manipulate and change my timing, it would be a little bit more challenging. But there are some people who work this way, and they do work very well. But those people, I believe, in my opinion, generally speaking, have learned to animate pose to pose first, allowing them to be stronger at straight ahead animation. So if you were to do straight ahead, you would go frame by frame by frame, and you would complete this entire animation. And for this animation assignment specifically, I want it to be no longer than 120 frames. So I would literally go down frame by frame by frame all the way to 120 until this animation is complete. Or you can do the method that I prefer starting out especially, and that is by animating pose to pose. And pose to pose will generally give you a more appealing animation because it's much easier to give feedback on a key pose than it is to change an entire animation sequence to adjust to a key pose. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go and select all my objects. I'm going to delete all of the keys, and I'm only going to do keyframes. And again, the reason I prefer this method is because if I were to make a really strong pose for my key pose, I can always change the timing. That's always an option. I can always manipulate my timing. If you animate pose to pose, it becomes incredibly difficult because you've done all that extra work. And if you get feedback from someone telling you, hey, you know what, this timing isn't right, you're going to have to delete all of those poses that you animated. It can become frustrating. So I personally prefer pose to pose, especially for animated characters. There are instances where you would want to do pose to pose, and that is when, again, you have animated characters, and straight ahead would also be really good for special effects. If you're doing droplets, if you're doing fire and flames, pose to pose can be really, really helpful for that because you're seeing how the last frame is manipulating into the effect. So I'm going to do this pose to pose. First pose, let me select my keys. Select the objects. And this tutorial will just be for pose to pose and blocking. We will cover cleanup and auto tangents in the next class, next week. So I'm going to go down the line. Again, I have no idea right now how many frames this will take. I'm going to feel out the animation. As we get better at animation, it's easier to tell what timing should be when we start understanding and valuing frames, but I'm still working on it, I'll fully admit. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to make my new keyframe, which is going to be my character bending up, or bending to get up. And now that I have that keyframed, I want to make sure that all my controllers are keyed in that point, because that's exactly how I want this character to look at this frame. So what I'm going to do is select my controller. Again, scroll down after you right-click your controller layer. I'm going to scroll down to select objects. And I'm going to press the S key, because all the keys that are here are exactly where I want them to be. So now that I have that keyed, I am now going to just scroll down wherever I want, doesn't matter, and I'm going to go to my next pose. And this next pose should be my character standing up. And let me go ahead and manipulate these keys right here so the back is straight. And sometimes I'll even do this. I'll just go to my rotations, select all of them, and I'll just press 0 to zero them all out so I can restart from the intended pose. So now that I have the back straight, I can manipulate it however I want. I want them to kind of stretch back a little bit. So I'm going to have them kind of stretch. Have this rotated a little bit more. I want them to stand as much as possible, so I'm going to remove this up. But again, see how the legs lock, like I mentioned earlier? So in my earlier tutorial, we were doing a stress test for this character, and the knees love to lock right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bend the knees ever so slightly. So if I have to bend them more, they don't lock up. So let's just have them there. And again, I'm going to rotate the spine back a little bit. I'm going to have this move forward. Something to also keep in mind too, something that I learned in life drawing, for anyone that's interested in illustration, the peach pit, I like to call it, or that's what my old mentor used to call it, the peach pit, which is basically that little spot right where your neck is, that little pit that you have right above your clavicle. Generally speaking, your center of gravity will line up where your peach pit lands. So right now, the center of gravity, if I'm looking right here, the peach pit should be about right there. So if I look at it, it's a little further back. I'm going to move it a little back more. So now when I look at the peach pit, the center of gravity, it's actually right the first time. Center of gravity is going to be right here. Perfect. So keep that in mind. Again, if you're an illustrator, I want to give you some other tips and tricks. You don't have to be an animator to utilize that tip, but it definitely helps. So now that I have my character, I actually want to rotate them a little bit more because, again, this is the benefit of pose to pose. I can push my poses more. So I'm going to go over the top of this and kind of stretch this character out a little bit more. Maybe not too much on the head. Perfect. So now that is my next key pose. And I want to make sure that all the controllers are selected and keyed on my keyframe. So again, if I look at this one, this hasn't been keyed. This hip controller has not been keyed. I want to make sure that all my keys are selected and then on the keyframe. That way, when I select my keyframe, if I need to move it to change the timing, I can move all the selected keys, no problem. So, and that's extremely helpful, especially when you're doing cleanup. I'll show you in the next week. So, now that I have this, my last key pose is going to be the rest. And so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to select all of these keys. And just like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go to the rotation and I'm going to zero them out. And that automatically resets my rig to its intended resting point. So I don't want this back to be completely straight. Believe it or not, I actually want it to have a bit of a C shape. So I'm going to manipulate the character a little bit to have a nice light C shape. I'm going to rotate this a little bit more, and I have a nice implied C. So again, I'm going to key all of the selected objects, and perfect. So these are my keyframes. Super, super easy, super, super simple. The next thing I would do after doing my keyframes is my in-betweens. So let's just play this out really quick. I'm going to get rid of my nerve curves by clicking on Show. I'm going to go to Show, scroll down, and you're going to unclick Nerve Curves. So now all I see is the grid, my character, and the HUD display. So I'm just going to play this to see how the timing feels. This feels okay. If I'm looking at this now, I know that this transition just feels way too fast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Show. I'm going to click Nerve Curves again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my layer, Controller. I'm going to right-click, select Objects. And I'm going to move this forward. Because if I'm looking at this, all of this action happens within 2 seconds. And I want to spend a little bit more time than that. So I'm going to select this, and I'm just going to scroll it down. So I'm going to hold this pose for a little bit longer, like they're doing a stretch, and then they're going to slowly go back into this pose. So I'm going to move this until it feels right. Again, this is the benefit of doing pose to pose. I can manipulate the timing with ease without having to worry about losing keys behind. So, or leaving keys behind. So now that I have this, let's play this out again. That feels better. So this feels like it stays longer, which I want, that stretch pose. And then we're going to ease into this. So another thing, and I'm really glad, sorry, Frida, I'm going to put you on blast right now because you did a great job. Frida, one of my students, mentioned that at the very end of one of my animations, it felt too abrupt of an ending, which is exactly what was intended. Great. I'm glad you mentioned it because it was too abrupt. Now, it's going to be the same thing at the beginning of my animation. So what I want to do is I want the audience to register that they're sitting for a few frames. That way they know that the character is at a resting point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these keys. I'm going to move them down the line. And I want my character to be sitting for about just under 16 frames. So I have this key. Now notice how nothing's happening up until this point. I actually want to maintain this key. So I'm going to select objects, and I'm going to press the S key. So now this character will be resting in the chair for 16 frames to give the audience time to process that this character is sitting. And that's giving me some more frames to play with now as a result. And what I'll do here during this dead time is I'll actually have the character moving ever so slightly. Not too much, but keep in mind with 3D animation especially, it's very easy for the character to feel dead if they're not moving. Unless it's intended. Hotel Transylvania is a great example for holding frames. So if you're interested in that style, please look at Sony Animation style. They do a very, very good job at timing and holding poses. But for the sake of this, we wanted to animate just a little bit. So now that I have all of my keyframes, I would then go into in-betweening, which is what I will cover when we come back after lunch. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next video.